Welcome to Breaking the Chain. I'm Jacob.
And I'm Cody.
And today we got a little bit of meta results, but we're going to go a little bit deeper into like what it takes to win your RTN. We have like a lot of tips and a lot of tips to talk
Yeah, no
about
tricks,
that.
just tips.
No tricks. And I mean, I've never won an RTN, so take what I say with a grain of salt, but I think I still have some pretty relevant knowledge coming through.
I want to say I have won an RTN, but I don't know if it was an RTN or ProQuest that I've won, but they're like the same level. So I definitely have some experience here, and I can share. And I think these tips will really help excel everybody who's listening in having the right mindset and the right goals in mind when approaching their local tournaments. Yeah. How about first of all, how was your week in Flesh and Blood?
It was good. I went to an armory, obviously brought Valda. I went 3-0, and I took on some pretty tough matchups. Like I beat Verdant. I think Archaeo is a good matchup, but I hear a lot of other Valdos don't think so. But I beat Archaeo, and I beat a Florian. So I took three.
Nice.
I think Florian's 50-50, but again, like I hear it's tough for some Valdos. So it's like, and I also think it's a little bit of my list and how I built it. But I ended up taking down the army on three tougher matchups. So that was cool.
Out of curiosity, was this the Monday or the Tuesday one?
This was Tuesday.
Tuesday, nice. Does that one always have just three rounds?
Normally, yes. Like, just because people don't want to stay super late since the launch is so late.
Because it gives a lot of people, right? Last time I was there, I couldn't play, but I went to give some cards out, and there was like 20 people. And I think you mentioned there was 3 rounds, and I was just wondering if it was just like a hard cap at 3 rounds or something.
It usually depends on what people want to do, if they want to play another round.
I see.
And a lot of people that aren't like top 4 especially don't want to play another round. And a lot of times people in top 4, it's like 9:30, 10. They're like, I just want to go home and to go to bed. So
yeah, fair enough. Okay, sorry to sidetrack. I was just curious about that. Anything else for this week?
Just a little bit of all the practice, but nothing crazy.
I didn't unfortunately get to an armory as usual. Maybe one day there'll be a Wednesday or like Friday armory that's a little bit closer to me that I want to go to. But I did play some online, some practice for this weekend with some Dash.io. My list is feeling pretty good. I have one concern and one concern only. And I'll get to that later, I think. I'm just hoping someone's not bringing a very specific deck to the RTN this weekend. That's all I can do. I just have to hope.
I know what deck it is.
You do? Yeah. Actually, I don't think we even have a section for me to talk about it. So I'll just say, I just hope nobody brings Fatigue Pallades to my RTN this weekend.
Really? Well, I was thinking Fatigue Jarl, but
I mean, I'm always worried about that one. But I think that after the last RTN, none of the Jarls top 8ing. I don't think I'm as concerned about Jarl showing up.
That's fair.
I could be wrong. Maybe there'll still be a Jarl. But I think, for example, one of the Jarl players is going to be on Florian instead. Because he's a huge Florian guy anyway. But we'll see. But yeah, no, Fatigue Pallades, I think for Dash.io is like a 0%er. It is the worst matchup for Dash.io by far.
I think it's crazy how like Fatigue Pallades like wins one RTN like last week or something.
No,
and all of a sudden
it placed 2 players in the top 8 of a Battle Hardened, I think it was.
Oh, I didn't hear about that at all.
Yeah. 2 players made top 8 of a Battle Hardened with it, and that's why it's been picking up some steam. So we don't have. Do we even have a single win this past week? Not to like get ahead of ourselves, but we don't. But I expect this pie chart to have a few Pallades next for this next week of Road to National.
Just as LSS intended. Pallades.
Yeah. We all knew that Pallades was broken. We just didn't know it was because she was fatigue broken. Yeah, we'll get into that whenever she becomes a little more popular. But yeah, that's the only worry I really have for this RTN coming up. But yeah, I played some Talishar. I'm trying to perfect the deck in terms of sideboarding, which we'll actually get into with our main topic later. I don't know if I even want a fatigue package in my deck anymore. As weird as that sounds. Because I feel like the only fatigue decks I play against are the ones that I have almost a completely losing matchup into, and I just have to high roll like the Cyclo Pounders and stuff to get there. And so I don't even know if I want them in the deck anymore. I could just say like I don't want to even bother with those matchups because it's like Jarl and Fatigue Pleiades. I have a new strategy into Florian that isn't like full fatigue style, so I don't need it for Florian. And it's like, who else? I guess Arachne Huntsman is like the only other deck that I want the fatigue package into. But even then, I could just run some other stuff. I'm thinking about like putting like there's like a non-max V version of the deck. And I was thinking about having like a sideboard package to like do that into some matchups to like run a max
really
V list.
Interesting.
Yeah,
I was talking at the Armory with a group of the guys, and it was all about like this fit or like other ways to play like Dio. That isn't fatigue. Really interesting.
It's such a cool deck because there's so many ways you can approach it, and a lot of them are just right. Like you can be right in multiple ways with how you approach the deck. And anyway, long story short, that's what I've been doing this week is agonizing over my sideboard and the potential matchups I'm going to see this weekend. With that, let's jump into the RTN Week 2 results, which are vastly different than last week's. I say vastly. It's not that vastly, but it is a big difference, I suppose. The top of the chart looks kind of interesting. You wanna say what's similar amongst the first quarter of the pie chart?
Pretty elemental, right?
Yeah, it does look pretty elemental.
One element per se, the essence of Earth.
Yeah.
Verdance and Florian popped off this week. Verdance got 19 wins and Florian got 18 wins. Together making up a total of 27% of the win percentage.
More than a quarter of the wins were Earth. Which is crazy. I mean, I did not expect
when you have Felling of the Crown. It's pretty strong.
Turns out the crown was held this past weekend by the Earth Heroes. So the first quarter of the pie chart is Verdance and Florian, and they're basically neck and neck. It's just one win off of each of them. Followed by Marionette with 10% of wins. Then KO also with 10% of wins. Gravy Bones with 7%. Kasai with 7%. Astilia with 7%. And then it's like Prism, Fang, Syndra, Victor, Dio, and then a lot of like 1 and 2-0s.
Yeah. Another Valda.
Hell yeah.
Keeping it true.
that'll be you sometime this month.
One day, at some point, if I can ever get into an RTN because there's any space, I might perhaps get a Valda win.
Mayhaps.
Not regarding that, but KO did a lot better this week compared to the week before, and it's something where we were talking about last week. Like, maybe KO is not as good. We should have just gone with our guts. Obviously, KO was as good as we said he was. People just weren't playing him to his potential, and he showed up to show us that.
Like we said, we have a podcast. We don't speak opinions. We speak facts. Why would we ever backtrack? We're just speaking truth.
The wholehearted truth.
Yeah, nothing but the truth. But yeah, I mean, outside of the Earth being at the top and KO getting some more wins, seems pretty standard.
I mean, Gravy and Kasai fell a little bit too, but I can't say anything's like super surprising. I think that the Earth Heroes are the top surprised me, but outside of that, everything else kind of makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. I'm sad to see that Dash.io is so low, but it is what it is. It's kind of a variance deck, so it'll jump up and down every week.
Right. I think it's pretty streamlined. Excuse me. I think it's pretty streamlined, but I also think it is like a specialist deck. Like you have to know what you're doing to win. Exactly. And it's something like someone sits down and like you're talking about worried about fatigue, like extreme fatigue, like Pleiades earlier. I think it's something where if you have no game plan or you're not good enough, especially at an RTN level with a game plan into those fatigue decks, it gets really tough to win because someone through the tournament's going to fatigue you. someone in our or the top 8's probably going to try and fatigue you. Top 4 is probably going to try and fatigue you. And there's going to be a point in which you have to know how to get around fatigue. You have to know how to play against that to a high enough level to be able to get that win, get that invite.
Yep. Yeah, no, and then that's the thing with the deck is that it's not even the fatigue decks that can fatigue you if you aren't really on your game. It's any deck can fatigue you if you are not careful. Gravy will fatigue you if you aren't prepared for it. Syndra can fatigue you if you aren't prepared for it. There's there's a lot of decks that you wouldn't think will fatigue you, and then they do, and you're like, oh, I lost because I clicked the heart button a little bit too much and it wasn't expecting to get fatigued by another aggro deck. So yeah, so it is like we mentioned in our tier list. It's a specialist deck. You really need to know what you're doing to win with this deck. And that's a big thing too. Is like there might be a ton of DOs that got top 4, but winning with it is really really tough. So. Not too surprised there. We do see that the fatigue decks seem to have fallen, namely Huntsman and Jarl. Those were near the bottom left of the pie chart. They had a good 5% ish last week, I think. And now we see that. Let's see. Huntsman got 1% and Jarl got less than 1%. So Jarl got 1 win and Huntsman got 2.
I just don't think fatigue's that good in this meta. Like, you have Gravy, you have Verdance, and you have Florian. Like, if you're fatigued, you auto lose 3 of the best matchups.
And I will say with the exception of one scary deck, but yeah.
I say auto lose, but it's something where it's like, I think in a high skill level like game, those are really tough matchups even on fatigue. Like, Verdance can stack kill you.
Well, so that's the thing is that
better value.
Verdance isn't as good at the fatigue matchup anymore. I heard that basically their combo is a little bit kneecapped by the way that they have to play the game now. So they can still run the combo package, but apparently it's not as good. At least this is just what I've heard. So they're slightly more susceptible to fatigue, especially if you have more than AB3, and they can't just arcane kill you with the tree and their 6 power spells. So yeah, so
I mean,
yeah,
I do agree with that. It was something that I thought of when they took away the Helm way back when, like when we put her on B on the tier list, because I'm like, oh, she's a lot more it's a lot more feasible to think of fatigue into her, but it's something that's still really hard, and one mistake could make the game.
Exactly.
I think it's harder to be a fatigue player, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. It's not impossible. You can still win an event as a fatigue player, but Verdance makes it very hard. Florian makes it very hard, and Gravy makes it very hard.
Yeah. No, Gravy is the big one. Florian is also pretty tough because once he gets online, he has the 1 card 5, right? Sometimes more depending on what weapon they're running and stuff. But
and then he's fatiguing you.
Yes, and then he's fatiguing you, exactly. I will say a lot of the damage is arcane typically, but
I guess that's fair.
It's more of a value deck than like a deck damage fatigue deck. But yeah, it's sorry. Let me go blow my nose if you want to talk about this a little bit more. Sorry, beer me.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And the one thing I want to say about Florian is he's not going to fatigue you late game as much, but I say that he's just throwing damage and you're blocking it out. He's going to require for 1 card, 2 cards from hand, and if he adds extra to the chain link, say he has Swarming Gloomveil, it's a 0 for 4 if you have 2 Rune Chants on board. So then you just 2 card 9, and at that point you're blocking with, if you're a fatigue deck, 2 cards. Well, it's only taking 1 card out of his deck, and he has outed right now a lot, so that's going to be another 0 for 3. So then you're blocking with 1 card on the weapon, 1 card on the outed attack, and you have 2 arcane coming at you, so you can really only respond with 1 attack back. It's something where it's do not necessarily gain back, especially late game.
All right, I'm back.
Okay.
Um, anything else you want to talk about when it comes to the RTN Week 2 pie chart?
Um, no, I think it looks just pretty normal. Like again, I think the Earth being a little high is crazier than I expected, especially at like the last calling. Verdance didn't do well at all, but
Yeah, and
the
that's the big
rest of it
thing
makes sense.
between the RTN pie chart and the like an overall tier list, right? Is that for an RTN, it's a very different set of decks that are going to perform well than it
Yeah.
is at the callings, right? Um,
Well, I think RTN like Verdance is better into a lot of the broad heroes.
yep,
She's not as
exactly.
good into the very specifically good here or like meta relevant heroes, if that makes any sense. And at an RTN, you're going to see a lot more broad heroes.
Yeah, we'll actually get into that a little bit in terms of deck selection for your to win your RTN. And that's a part of it is that you want to have a deck that's robust, right? Whereas in some of these bigger tournaments, you want to have a deck that is super targeted towards the top of the meta pick. And so that's why you'll see some of these differences too in terms of what's performing well at a local level versus what is performing well at a large event. Um, but yeah, I don't have any too much else to say. This seems pretty standard outside of the Earth. Being at the top, I think
Mhm.
there's definitely going to be some jumbling around when it comes to local wins. But yeah, I'm curious to see how week 3 stacks up to this. I think I predict week 3 will be a little bit closer to week 1. That's my guess.
I think so too. I'm interested to see how it evolves because like the difference between the weeks is pretty big. Like it is interesting to see like Gravy and Kasai fall so much and be replaced pretty much with like Florian and Verdance. Like they all just switch places, it feels like.
But yeah, before we get into how to win your RTN, I just want to mention that the world premiere sold out. The world premiere for Compendium of Wraith in London, which I thought was pretty cool. I heard there
That's
were
pretty
some
cool.
mixed thoughts on whether people really cared to go, but the fact that it sold out means enough people cared to go. That's pretty sick. I'm
Yeah.
excited for it. I'm excited to see how that works. Do we know the world premiere is the week after the full set, not full set reveal, but the common and rare reveal, right? I want to say it's like February, the first
I,
week of February,
I think so. Uh I'm pretty sure, but I'm not entirely sure. I am not going to the world premiere.
Me
Uh
either. But I want to say it's the week after the January 31st full set reveal, which, by the way, as a reminder, we are going to have a live stream on that day to go over all of the cards that are released for the common and rare playset, or no, common rare set from Compendium of Wraith. So stay tuned for more details on that. We'll probably have a specific time and everything next week for you guys. But with that, let's jump into how to win your RTN. So just as an overall structure of how we're gonna talk about this, we're gonna start with picking the right deck. Then we'll go into how to perfect your deck. Then talking about how to play well at your RTN, and then finally learning from your mistakes so that you can play better the next time. So when it comes to picking the right deck, actually we didn't really discuss how we want to like talk back and forth about this, but
I mean,
uh,
you can bring up a point. I'll interject when it's
just
important, but don't worry. I'm good at interjecting, so
all
you don't have to worry.
right. Perfect. So for picking the right deck, first you want to make sure you know what the meta is. Um, Shameless plug for our tier list from a few episodes ago. It's
Ugh,
actually pretty
the
accurate.
perfect tier list.
The perfect tier list, really. Um, you want to know what is meta. You want to look at these pie charts. You want to see what people are playing overall, and then you want to see what your local meta is playing to then tailor your choice to your local meta as well. So, for example, if you look back at our tier list, which pretty closely resembles the results from these past 2 weeks, you'll know that Mario, Kasai, and Gravy are in S tier, and then there's a lot of good A tier decks and some specialist decks that are all great options for an RTN. Uh, and then you'll want to go look at your local level and say, let's say that you have a ton of Guardians at your local level. Well, maybe you want to lean towards Gravy, who is notoriously good into Guardians, into those decks that can't really deal with the allies too well. Maybe you have a lot of Earth heroes in your local meta. So then you might be like, the whole thing kind of is good into Earth Heroes. Maybe I want to start playing Fang or Kasai. Things like that, right? Because as a counterpoint to that kind of beneficial deck choice, you want to make sure you don't choose a negative deck choice. Like, for example, if your meta has a lot of Gravy Bones, you probably don't want to play a Guardian. You probably don't want to play who else is a good choice. You probably don't want to play Florian.
You don't want
Things
to
like
play
that.
a lot of like slower decks
Yes.
that don't have a lot of action points to take it out. And it's something where I think you don't have to be like top of the tier list as much as like especially a local level. You just have to have something that counters a lot of your or like it has a playability into a lot of your locals. Where it's like again, if you have a lot of gravies, you're not gonna want to do a single action point hero. You don't want to do like Balda as much as you want to do, and you don't want to do like Victor. You don't want to do like there's a lot of multi action point heroes now.
Well, it's not even necessarily about like single like action points. It's really just like knowing what decks are good or bad into other decks,
Yeah.
and not picking a deck that is already going to put you at a disadvantage from the start, right? You want to make sure that you're at least on an even playing field the moment you step through the door of your RTN. Like you don't want to handicap yourself, right? That's all I'm trying to get across here. So make sure you pick not only a deck that is just inherently strong by itself, but a deck that is the right choice for your local RTN, because every RTN is different. Then probably the most important part actually is pick a deck that you are comfortable with. You know, you don't want to be playing your first event on Acilio for your RTN, right? That's not going to go well for you. So you want to make sure you are comfortable on the deck that you bring. You want to make sure that you enjoy the deck and or the playstyle, because if you don't enjoy it, you're not going to have fun and you're going to make mistakes, or you're just going to kind of be, not have as much of a focus on it. It's just hard to play a deck that you don't enjoy, honestly.
And this is like where I want to interject a little bit is like I think it's very, very important you play a deck you have fun with. Because like I think it was like a year ago at the RTNs. I played Aurora. She was best deck in the room. I did terrible. I think that was the worst I've ever done at an RTN.
Yep.
And then the ProQuest season after, where I don't think there was much meta change. I think Viscerai got support. I think it was like maybe this. No, it wasn't Viscerai. Anyways, I just remember it was like the ProQuest afterwards, where the meta hadn't changed too much. I'm like, I'm not playing Aurora. I just don't have as much fun on Aurora as I do Jarl or whoever. And it was like Mistveil was still out, so still had a ton of bad matchups as a Guardian. Like, okay, I don't want to sit in front of any of the Mistveil heroes. I don't want to sit in front of any of the Wizards. I don't want to sit in front of whatever. But I'm like, I'm just gonna have more fun on Jarl. I'm just gonna go sit down and play this deck. And I ended up playing a lot better. I think I made it into top 8. It's hard to remember, but I remember I played so much better, and I had such better results that ProQuest season, and it was something where I was like, it is very important you play something you have fun with and something that you think you can win on. And I think it's more important than choosing like a meta relevant deck where it's like, okay, like Gravy's really good into the meta I have. I don't like Gravy. I'm not comfortable on Gravy. I don't think you're gonna perform well. Well, you could be like, Kasai's okay into the meta I have, but I am super comfortable in Kasai. Say I'm like, I mastered Kasai. I'd rather play Kasai in that scenario than Gravy. I think it's important you have fun because you're also more engaged with the information. You have more knowledge of matchups. I think it's important that you like pick the deck that you enjoy and that you have reps on because you know so much more and you're so much willing to engage in more. It's something where you're like, it's also easier for you to watch the opponent and what they're doing. Where it's like if you have a deck you don't know as well, it's harder to watch with the opponent's pitch stacking, or it's harder to notice like some tells that your opponent has. Like, oh, they have 2 floating and it's a CNC and they have something in arsenal, or they have an extra card in hand. Obviously, it's a pummel. But if you're so entrenched in your hands because you're not used to the deck you're playing, you're not going to notice the CNC pummel. You're like, oh man, I just have to block 6 and get on to my turn. And that's why I think it's so important you choose a deck that you're comfortable on and that you enjoy.
Yeah, 100%. obviously choosing an inherently strong deck is good, but if you don't know the deck or you're not comfortable or you don't like it, is going to perform much worse than a deck that you are comfortable with, right? Um, so yeah, that's number one. Pick a deck that you enjoy and you're comfortable with, and then go from the meta results and the strength and local meta and all that kind of stuff after the fact.
And one thing like you could also look at is like prepare early. Like if you
Yes.
really want to win an RTN, prepare early. Because if you go in and you're the week before just now like, oh, RTNs are going on, like let me play this deck because I'm comfortable with it. It's not very good meta relevant. You it might be a lot harder. While it's like if you prepare early, you could figure out like, hey, I actually really enjoy Mario. I think Mario's really good in this meta. I'm normally a Valda player. I could put Valda aside, practice on Mario, get comfortable with Mario, and then go to my RTNs with a deck that I think is much more meta relevant. And it's like, if you really want to win, that's something where you set that aside and prepare a little bit early to understand your matchups and understand like what deck you think is good and what if you're comfortable and then if you enjoy it. Because if you can find all three, if you think you found a good deck early, you're comfortable and you can enjoy it, I think you have a really good shot.
Yep. 100%. Yeah. And that's like that's the biggest deal, right? If you have a good deck, you're comfortable with it, and you enjoy it, you are prone to success from the start. So very important baseline to have when it comes to winning RTN. Yeah, and actually, just on the last point for picking the deck, if you a lot of times people just don't really know what the meta is going into one of these local seasons, right? Maybe there was a recent ban list, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe a very popular hero LL'd or something. Maybe a new set came out, and now the meta is in disarray. Like you don't know what it is. Into you have an RTN the first week. That's when comfortability matters the most,
Yeah.
because a lot of people won't know what's going on, and if they're playing any of the new stuff, they might not have refined deck lists or sideboard guides or anything. So just playing something that's consistent and you're comfortable with will always set you up for success, regardless of what is currently popular. Yeah, so the second bullet is perfect your deck. And what we mean by that is make sure that you have plenty of games on your deck. You are very experienced in the deck. You know the ins and outs of it, what your overall game plan is into the average deck. In addition to knowing the macro game plan into every at least relevant matchup. For example, as Dash.io, I want to typically just kill everybody, but that's not the macro game plan into every deck, right? For example, in Dekasai, it's actually a very close matchup because they get to on a whim decide if they want to try to fatigue me or kill me. So my macro game plan is to do a little bit of both of aggression and setup. Because if I just go full aggro, they will just block out and fatigue me. But if I do some setup, they will just kill me. So I have to know this macro game plan of I need to take my setup spots when I can. I need to be very diligent about not giving them too much space to start forcing cards on my hand. Things like that, right? Like knowing your game plan into every hero is very important. And so then you can perfect your deck to match that, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
You can then know because of this game plan I need to into the top heroes, I need to have these tools in my sideboard. I need to make sure that I run this many cards and maybe into a certain matchup, things like that.
Yeah, and like talking about the sideboard and
Yeah.
like knowing how much you like need to go in each matchup, I also think like the next big point is like having a robust sideboard.
Yep.
And it's something like this is something I think that I do well about like flesh and blood in my decks is like not only just having a sideboard and a guide to the sideboard, because it's one thing to net deck. It's like, oh, I took this big deck, this is what their sideboard is. But I think it's really important to understand why your sideboard's in there, like why each card is in that deck and why it's relevant. Because it's something where if you have a different meta, like I think it was really cool around the Colorado area for a while because there was a few ice jarls and
Mm-hmm.
mainly me, but there was a couple ice jarls around here, and that wasn't a big thing anywhere else. Like a lot of them were earth heavy or they were very fatigue faced. So it's something where you have to understand your sideboard because say you took a Dio list and you're going to sit down in front of a Jarl and it's like, okay, this list says I need this, 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 and this for this specific matchup. Well, I'm not necessarily a fatigue list. I can still fatigue you as an Ice Jarl, but it's something where I'm a lot more about the disruption and slowing you down than I am about the idea of straight out blocking you out. And that's something where looking at a sideboard and understanding the difference of like, okay, this is what the guide says, but my local meta says this. And understanding like, okay, this is important for this card. Or like another example, like I can pull up for like I run Valda all the time, and there are definitely times when I sit down in front of an opponent and go, okay, I know this is how they play. I'm actually going to separate this card out and put in this card. And it could be something like, not that I see this around, but this is I think a really good example is like, imagine there's a Marlin around and you are playing a Guardian. Chokeslam's really good in a Marlin because it prevents them from gaining power on attack actions. But say this Marlin is like a go again, draw as many cards, go as wide as I can Marlin. Chokeslam means nothing. It has no text if they're not building tall. So that's when all of a sudden you might switch up your game plan. And like my list has Boulder Drop that I actually side out for Chokeslam in that matchup. And that's like a situation where you could be like, oh, okay, like I understand, I know my meta, I know this player. I know that this Chokeslam doesn't do anything into their deck, but this Boulder Drop does more because they need to keep their hand to go wide. So that's something where it's like knowing why your sideboard is in there also lets you change your sideboard if you see something that's more relevant. Like,
Yep.
because there are definitely times where I sit down in front of a player and I don't run generic, like, I don't run the exact same net deck as a lot of players on a lot of heroes. Like, when I was on Jarl, I was on Ice Jarl. On Valda, I like the old ones over Righteous Cleansing. Like, it's a little bit different, but I think it changes the hero so much. And it's something where if you don't understand the unique differences between some of these cards, you can never like and why these cards in the sideboard come into these matchups. You're gonna suffer sometimes if you took a bad card into a matchup and you're not gonna understand why it's bad because you don't understand the sideboard matchup.
Yeah, 100% agree. Yeah, you make up a really good point. And I do want to preface with, just in case anybody thinks otherwise, I am completely for net decking. By the way, I am the biggest net decker there is when it comes to, especially when it comes to like starting at a baseline with the deck.
Oh yeah.
Obviously, it's fun to build your own deck, and that's probably the better way to go. But net decking will get you a really good start, and will get you a really huge head start. Um, but on your topic, let's say you do grab somebody's list, you have a sideboard guide, maybe from some Metafy article from somebody or anything, and you don't maybe don't read through their discussion on why they sideboard certain ways into certain heroes. And as an extreme example, back when Dorinthia was a little bit more popular and had like 3 different lists that they could be running, where it was like hatchets or Great Axe or Dawnblade. And I was on Dromai back then. I would have to hedge if I didn't know. Like if I was at a calling or something, I would have to hedge and have some fatigue package in my deck and some non-fatigue package. Because if I ran all the D reacts and they ended up being Great Axe, that'd be really bad for me because then if they were Dawnblade, then I could get fatigued, like fatigued Dawnblade rather. But what I'm trying to get at is if you just blindly sideboard into a deck, but you know that you should be sideboarding differently based on your experience with the player, or you just know their deck from maybe seeing it played next to you at the table before, you need to know how to deviate from the sideboard guide, right? You need to know your deck in and out to be able to take what is told to you to sideboard and be able to modify it on the fly to have a better success into certain matchups. Kind of went off the rails with that one, but that's what I was trying to get at. Is like when it comes to the sideboard guide, you need to know how, like when and why to deviate.
Mm-hmm. And it might not be common. It might be something that like 99 times out of 100 you just follow the sideboard guide, but you need to know when that like 1 of 100 matters. You need to know when you like see something, you see someone's list, and or you know someone, you're like, this is just different than what the sideboard guide ever brings up.
Yep.
And I think that's really important because there are like, I mean, I think there are games that you're going to run into once an armory where something might be a little bit different. At least from my perspective,
Yeah.
there's sometimes just something a little weird.
No, it
But
always happens to me.
I,
Like, yeah.
yeah. And it's like I want to say I'm okay with net decking too. I think it's actually really important, especially when you're jumping onto a new deck. But it's the only thing I like to think about is like, why is sideboard there? And also sometimes question, why is this a main board card? Why is this always in the list? And that's when you like sometimes you have to question that. And I know it's something like with again, I go back to Balda, but it's like grandeur and is always in the list. Like I always have it in the list, but it's something where it's a main board card, but I sit down in front of Dio and I'm like, this just doesn't work into Dio. I have to take grandeur out.
Mhm.
It's a non-block. I cannot have a non-block in my deck. So it's like in Leyline, I take Leyline out into Dio because it I'm not going to be attacking every turn to keep Leyline up. I can't. It's another non-block, so it's something where it's like these decks that are considered main deck that sit in the deck that are in every other matchup. I sit down in front of Dio or Mechanologist maybe and go, this is just not relevant in this matchup, and I have to take it out of main deck and put more cards from sideboard in. And that's why I'm like, I think knowing knowing your deck this like deeply allows you to make some adjustments.
Right. And actually, you bring up a good point. Especially if you do end up net decking and you like just copy over the sideboard guide and you don't modify it at all. A lot of times those sideboard guides are only into the top of the meta decks. They won't have any kind of sideboarding for maybe some like B or C tier decks that you'll run into at these RTNs. And so then if you don't know your deck in and out, you don't know why cards are sideboarded in and out, then you'll face one of these matchups and you won't know what to do. You'll look at your sideboard guide, it won't have a matchup for Arachne Huntsman, and you'll be like, well, what do I do for this matchup, right? Like, how do I sideboard for this? And you'll stumble if you don't know what to do, if you don't know your deck well enough to be able to sideboard without a guide. So honestly, like my goal whenever I learn a deck is to know it well enough to not need the sideboard guide, to know why every card goes in, to not and basically what I'll do is I'll first sideboard as if I know what I'm doing, and then I'll check the sideboard guide and make sure that I sideboarded correctly after the fact. I do like almost like a little mini test every time I sideboard. And that will like make sure I know, okay, I want this card in for this reason, this card out for this reason, and then I double check, okay, it lines up with whoever made the deck. I now understand why these cards are in and out.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big thing. Is like a lot of times if you deck, you won't have a sideboard for every matchup, and that's important.
Mm. And I just think it's important to know what every card does and
Yes.
why it's relevant, because you also will take bad lines in the game if you think a card's good and it's not actually good.
Yeah. Another point on this actually too is that you need to make sure that your sideboarding is relevant to your local meta as well. For example, if you bring a deck and the sideboard guide says, "Hey, you need to run this fatigue package into such and such deck," and only that deck, and you know there's going to be zero, maybe one of that deck at your meta, you need to know how to modify your deck to cut those cards out. You don't need to be wasting sideboard space on a deck you will very unlikely hit. And that's where I was talking about with like my Dash IO deck. I'm considering just cutting my fatigue package entirely because what matchup do I even want to run that into that is not basically an auto loss already? So like it gets to the point where you want to make sure that you're sideboarding for your local meta and you're not running dead cards for your local meta as well.
The last thing I want to add is like sometimes you'll have like sideboard that is meant to make a matchup like from like a 10%er to
Yes.
a 20%er.
Yes.
And it could be something like I actually think Valda before Gravy hit bans was actually good into Gravy because Gravy just drew so many cards that I got to do a lot of things for free, which allowed me to block more, which allowed me to be more aggressive. It's like I blocked more and was more aggressive, which was like a really weird thing. But now that Gravy has been getting cards banned, it's Valda's matchup has actually been getting worse and worse in the Gravy. And it's something where I'm taking out more sideboard cards for Gravy because if I wanted to invest into beating Gravy at the same level I was beforehand, I have to take half my sideboard just for one hero. And that's when it's like, okay, if I'm investing all this into one hero, then I'm struggling more into the rest of the field. And you have to understand one is more important to play the rest of the field or one hero. If Gravy was de facto best deck and everyone was still playing Gravy, then of course I'd be willing to invest all that. But especially in our locals, there's like only a couple Gravies at a 50-person event. So it's something where it's like if I run into them, I'm going to be less likely to win, but I'm more likely to win every other match and I'm more likely to run into every other match. So
Yeah.
knowing when to take some percentage points off of one match to go into another or even just the field is I think is really important.
No, that's a super good point. Yeah, glad you brought that up because yeah, some people will have a very robust sideboard guide into a deck that just will not show up at all, and that's typically where the difference comes in between building a deck for a local level versus a larger like a calling or a pro tour, right? Whenever you build a deck for those bigger events, your sideboard guide is typically much more narrow towards top of the meta. Whereas for your local RTN or ProQuest, you want to make sure your sideboard guide is much more wide and robust to deal with all the decks, and have the best chance into most decks. So yeah, very good point on tailoring your sideboard for your local meta. Yeah, anything else on perfecting your deck before we go into playing well at the RTN itself?
I'm ready to jump into playing well at the RTN. Like, as much as I personally think sideboard guide is really important, playing well at the RTN is obviously the most important thing. You're not
Yeah.
going to win if you don't play well. It doesn't
Right.
matter how prepared you are or if you have the right deck. You could have chosen Teklo Vossen. It doesn't matter. Like, if you're not prepared, you're not going to win. I
Agreed.
mean, if you're not ready to play well, you're not going to win.
Agreed. So I had a couple things at the start here, which is to arrive early and rested. Make sure this is like just the basic stuff, right? Get enough sleep the night before. Make sure you're not getting there a minute before registration and your like heart's pumping, your adrenaline's going. You have to like write your deck list down last minute, which is obviously not really a thing you have to do these days. But like make sure that you're not starting your first round in within adrenaline mode and like rushing and you know anyway, what I'm trying to get at is like make sure that you're
Pretty
calm.
mentally.
You're mentally clear when you start your tournament. Get a good breakfast, whatever that is for you. Some people like to work out in the morning. It is actually, I think, scientifically proven that if you work out in the morning, you you can think better throughout the day. I wish I had an article to point to that, but I know for a fact that that's like the case. Is if you work out, if you get some exercise, some cardio in the morning, then you're clear throughout the day. I need to do that more often. I don't do that myself, but I need to do that more often. Is to like get a little bit of exercise in the morning, get my body awake, my brain functioning. And then the second thing I have is have a plan for lunch. This is actually a pretty big one. Is that if you haven't been to these
huge one.
yeah, it's a huge one. If you haven't been to a local event yet, if you actually I'll reverse that. If you have been to a local tournament, you'll know that most of the time lunch is not it's not something easy to do at these local tournaments. Most of them start anywhere from like 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. and there's no break for lunch. And if you are on a deck that typically goes to time, you need to have a way to get food during the day. Whether it's having maybe some protein bars that you bring with you just to have a snack throughout the day, or maybe even actually bringing a whole lunch, Brody style, like bringing a ham sandwich and having something to actually eat in between rounds or even during your round. Just have a plan for lunch because if you don't have anything, then you'll find yourself at the end of like round 5 of Swiss. It's like 3 or 4 p.m. You haven't eaten like anything all day, and you are just hungry. You're tired. You're just not feeling great, and you won't play your best.
Yeah, and it's something where it's like I play Guardian, so obviously a lot of my rounds go very long, and I never know when I have a shorter round. I've definitely had shorter rounds, like like I just drew the gas, or the opponent just drew the gas, or it was a Kano, and they comboed me on turn 2, so nothing I could really do. It's like I don't know when I'm gonna have a quick round, but most of the time they're very long. So what I've been doing whenever I go to events is I actually get like just a box of protein bars or something like that and throw it in my backpack. So in between rounds I can snack.
Yep.
Just so I
So
was like, oh, I can eat here, I can do this. And it's like if I'm not hungry, I don't have to commit to sitting down in a fast round and eating a whole meal. But
yep.
it's like, okay, like I finished my round. Everyone's getting ready for the next round. I am a bit hungry. Let me just eat one of these like protein bars and I'll go into the next match and I'll be a lot clearer. I'll be a lot happier. Like,
Yeah,
so it's
exactly.
something that I've been like thinking about a lot. I would say more in the last year. And I will say that I have started to perform a lot better. Although I haven't gone to as many events, I've performed a lot better after I've taken care of myself more.
Yeah, it's super undervalued how much this out of game process for preparing for these tournaments is. Like it's important, right? Like having a terrible routine will cause a terrible performance. um, yeah, I just want to have that in there, even though it's not part of like the actual gameplay itself. It is a very important part of performing well.
Yeah.
Um, then stay calm and have a healthy goal. Some people will set a goal of I want to win, I want to get my invite, and that's obviously like that's everyone's goal, right? Like it's hard to not
Mm.
have that goal, but make sure that you're playing to learn and not to win. And what I mean by that is that if you're playing to win, then you will be disappointed most of the time, and you will be in a bad mood whenever you lose. You'll be more prone to getting tilted, things like that. But if you're playing to learn, playing to have an open mind into some matchups, and making sure that you are taking in what the game state is telling you, and you're trying to make the most of each game and learn from each game, then you'll have a healthy mindset on it. You'll say, okay, I messed up, but it's interesting. And you'll like, if you frame it differently, like, okay, I made a mistake, but since I learned from it, that's a win for me because my goal was to learn, right? If your goal is to learn and not to win, then you'll have a healthy frame of mind when it comes to mistakes or bad variance or certain runouts of cards, and you will be much less prone to be tilted, and you'll just be happier at the tournament in general.
Yeah, and again, like the same with like enjoying the deck you play. I think the happier you are at a tournament, the more you're like, oh, okay, like sure, I lost that matchup, but I learned if I play it again today, like I think I can take it on now, or this, that, or another thing. It's like if you have a good mood going into the next matchup, it helps a lot.
A lot.
And it's like something where there was one calling where I could have dayed two, and there was one match where I was mentally fatigued, jumped into the next match like immediately, didn't have time to like de-stress, and I like was a like I wouldn't say tilted, but I definitely was off my game because I'm like, man, that game went way longer than I wanted it to. This. I was thinking more about the past game than I was the current game, and I missed day two because I made a simple mistake on turn zero my next game. I just didn't block an attack. Like it was not relevant. Like it was turn zero. I had a bad hand. I just didn't block an attack, and that caused me to lose the game on exact lethal, where I would have had a better hand the next turn, but also like generally had 3 more life if we ended up in the exact same situation. So it's something where I think it's really important to be able to be like calm throughout game to game to game.
Yeah. So I want to correct something there. You mentioned that you weren't tilted, but you played off your game. I think there's a typical interpretation of tilted as like kind of like fuming and like angry, and that's actually not that's not what tilted actually means. Tilted is just playing off your game. It doesn't necessarily mean you're angry or upset at something that happened. It's just like you are not playing as you should be playing. That's all that tilted means. So you were tilted, you just weren't mad, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Um,
okay, that does make a lot of sense.
yeah.
Yeah, I was like,
Yeah,
it's unfortunate that I had to lock in the turn after, but no, I
right.
get what you're saying.
But that's an important point you brought up, though, is that if you make sure that you have a healthy mindset and you reset between each game, you're less likely to make mistakes on the first turn of the next game, for example. That's a big thing, right? Is like if you play a fatigue deck or you play a match that goes really long and you're the last game to play, you're packing up as they're setting the next round. You want to make sure that you're staying calm, that you're okay, because if you rush into the next game, you might make a mistake in sideboarding. You might accidentally do something on turn zero while you're still trying to reset yourself. things like that, and that is being tilted. I just want to clarify that is part of what I'm trying to get at is like you aren't on your A game. You are playing not to your best performance. So yeah, do whatever it takes to not get tilted. That's a huge factor in playing well at your RTN. Then for the actual gameplay stuff, always think of the game state and the macro game plan. For example, there are some decks where you will have the option just to either choose to block for 3 or send 3. And a good example is like Slippy. You have the inherent go again, so you can send an attack for 3 go again that probably doesn't get anything more, or you can block for 3. You need to know what your macro game plan is, how the game state is going, to know whether it's more important to block 3 or send 3. And this relates back to an old Magic the Gathering article called "Who's the Beatdown." Highly recommend reading it if you haven't read it before. Just Google "Who's the Beatdown" MTG, or probably just even "Who's the Beatdown." You don't need to include the MTG part. And I highly recommend reading that. It's basically, long story short, it makes sure what's the word I'm looking for? It tries to get you to constantly evaluate who is the aggressor in a matchup, which is relevant in every single game. Who is the aggressor? It's usually one deck or another, but in some matchups, it can be very flexible. Like I mentioned with the Dasho versus Kasai. Who's the Beatdown is actually very flexible in that matchup. Sometimes I'm the aggro deck as Dasho, and sometimes they're the aggro deck as Kasai. And being able to correctly evaluate that and play for that is super important. So knowing the game state and the macro game plan and how that affects the game state is really big. And last thing I'll talk about this before you step in. Sorry. Last thing I'll talk about this is I know whenever I play against players that are a little less experienced, I notice that they make this mistake a lot, and that leads to them losing the game. Right? They will maybe block with a card when they should be attacking with it, or they'll be playing towards some, their typical combo or their typical game plan as the hero, when actually they should be stepping away from that game plan for the current state of the game and be doing something else instead of the familiar game plan, because they are misanalyzing the game state, misunderstanding what their new macro game plan is in that game state. And so it's just making sure that you are constantly reevaluating and not autopiloting how to win the game. You need to find out the way to win the game from every single turn by turn, or even decision by decision, and understanding what the best plays are to get to that point.
Yeah, and to dive deep into this, I think it's going to bring in a few of the bullet points we have aside. But it's like to always think of the game state, and it's something where like whenever I draw a hand, one of the first things I always think whenever I draw a hand is, how am I winning this game?
Yep.
What process do I need to take to win this game? And sometimes it's the opponent presents something that changes what I think, but it's like something where your game will consistently shift. And it's one thing that I really like about Guardian specifically. It's like I sometimes will sit down and it's aggressive matchup. Like I draw a hand like against Florian. How do I win this game? I have to be as aggressive as possible. I cannot let him get decomposed. I cannot let this hit second cycle. I have to be as aggressive as possible. Pitch stack doesn't matter as much, although I should still be thinking about it. But I look at my hand. I need to throw. I can't keep this good card for later. I need to throw now. Well, it's something where you go against like an RKO, and I think this is another reason that some players struggle into RKO is the game state into RKO is consistently changing. It's a deck where it's like, okay, what's happening? Well, I'm being fatigued, so I need to kill them faster. So you go aggressive, and then all of a sudden they throw a big attack at you, and it's something where it's like, okay, well, if I take this attack, then I'm going to be so far behind on life that I can't keep up with them, and they get much more value. So now I have to understand that maybe I was getting fatigued last turn, but this turn I cannot fall this far behind. I have to block out. And then it's something where it's like every hand you should draw up and be like, okay, how do I win this game? How do I approach this game? What is the way to ensure that I can win later on? And one thing that I think is really interesting, or like one game that I think about a lot whenever I think of like, how do I win this game, even from a point in which you're behind, is actually the Pro Tour of Los Angeles, the very last game where what was his name? The Dromai player. But he took a
Um,
really
Arthur Trehay.
weird Arthur Trehay, where like he won only if he drew sigil off top, but he was able to like think far enough ahead to do an awkward block where I think he took some damage 2 turns ahead to Arsenal a sink below. So when the dominate came, he could sink a card to guarantee he had the way workaround on a dominate attack or on another like to work around what was a very specific play he normally could not have worked around. And that's where I'm like, I think it is like that game is an excellent like example of he took a really awkward play at one point because he knew the only way to win was to work around dominate when it came. And that's where it's like I think that is super important that you can throughout the entire game look at your hand and go, how do I win from here? And it's
Yep.
something that, like, again, every hand, as soon as I draw it up, how do I win? And then when the opponent plays a card, how does this change how I win? How should I block to keep my winning state? Like, I win through fatigue. I need to not only block out, and I think this is another thing that people don't understand about fatigue. It's like you don't always want to block out the fatigue, but there's fatigue by damage. So it's sometimes really important that, like, I keep this really big attack because I fatigue them this way. I take a little bit of damage, but I throw 10 back. They're at 10 health. They have to block. They have no armor left. So I throw this 10. They take damage down to 4. Now I'm down to 4, but I get another 10 at them. And now they have to block with 2 cards. And if they only block with 2 cards, they're down to 1. And then now my hammer for 4 each turn is super threatening because now you have to block with 2 cards each turn. And it's something where it's like understanding, like, okay, I can go to fatigue if I play aggressive. And it's really weird how that works, but understanding that I think is super important.
I agree. Yeah, so like without going, spending too much time on that topic, but long story short,
Right.
make sure you know how you're winning the game from every point in time. Especially, it's hard to do it for like every decision, but every major transition in the game, like if your opponent throws a CNC at you, okay, what changes? How do you win the game from here? Stuff like that.
Yeah.
Another thing is, what is your opponent telling you? And this is a bit of a higher level topic, but sometimes your opponent will give you tells on how they want to play the game. Sometimes it's as simple as when the game starts, what equipment are they flipping over, right? Knowing how their deck functions almost better than they know how their deck functions is really important to know to setting the correct macro game plan to win that game.
And it's
Go ahead.
I think it's like another example I've had of like what is your opponent telling you is like one of the best games I've ever played was into an assassin, and it was a low reaction assassin list where it was something like 3 or 4 turns in. I realized that this assassin deck has like little to no reactions, and not that there wasn't any, but it was little reactions. So it was something where I was able to play a slower game in response to what their deck was telling me and what they were playing. Like, hey, I'm just throwing straight up. I'm going this go again into this. I'm doing this into this. And it's something where it's like, okay, I can just block you out and pit stack based on what your deck's telling me.
Yep. And like another example too is like Astastrio, I'm always looking for how many D reacts is this deck running, right? And so if I see, 1 Sync, 1 Fate, 1 Shelter played in a Kasai list, okay, they're probably on 9 D reacts. That changes how I play the game. Things like that. Like make sure you pay attention to what your opponent is telling you. The last part about playing well at your RTN is knowing how you can win from behind and playing to win from when you're behind. There's gonna be a lot of games where you're like, wow, I lost. Like your opponent high rolled or did this, that, or the other, and I'm in a losing position. I don't think I can win this game. And a lot of people will give up. I've been in that spot where I just give up. I think that it's just an unwinnable game. And that's a mistake because a lot of games are way more winnable than you think they are. Your opponent can just draw a super dud hand, or like for example against Syndra, maybe you're super behind, and then they draw up a hand that has no go again. Well, now you can win. Don't concede yet because that can happen. Or you play for super insane top decks on your side, like maybe you have a random card draw, and if it's a specific card, you can win the game. Things like that. Like if you are super behind, you can make these risky plays and play for your outs. I had a game at my last RTN against Kasai where I was like 10 or 12 health behind, and I was like, I have to play to randomly find max V here. Like that's the only way I can win is I have to randomly find max V on the top of my deck. And so I played that out. I found the max V and I won the game. And just knowing how you win the game from every point, even when you're behind, is important to grab some of those extra wins. Anything else on playing well before we jump into learning from your mistakes?
I think we covered a lot and a good amount in the playing well section, so I think we can jump into learning from mistakes.
All right. And this part's really important because this is how you play well at the next RTN or the next ProQuest, right? If you do poorly, actually, even if you do well, just making sure you learn from your mistakes to do better at the next tournament and to make sure that you're improving at the game when you play it, not just playing the games and wiping your memory out once you leave the doors of your LGS.
And I think this is actually the most important step
Yes.
for future tournaments.
Yes.
Like, obviously, you want to play well your RTN for this tournament. You want to prepare for this tournament. You want to have the right deck for this tournament. But it's like learning from your mistakes is the best step for the next tournament and any tournament in the future. It's something where it's like I think like some of the biggest things I think in every game, even if you didn't necessarily lose, but you have something you thought in game that you thought was a little strange. I always ask questions because that's your best way to improve. If you've lost, ask questions why. Because sometimes when you lose, you lost because you lost 1 point of value. Like the story I was talking about earlier, where I blocked wrong on turn 0 and lost exact life. It was something where like I was able to self-identify that, but it's something where it's like maybe I lost. I could have turned to the opponent and been like, "Hey, what's wrong?" And they're like, "Oh, you just didn't block on turn 0, and then you didn't represent a lot of damage back on your turn 1. Like you didn't respond very well for not blocking." And that's something where if you ask your opponent that, they can usually give you a little bit of information. And even if they can't, just digest what you've done and see where you could have made a mistake. Because I think it's super important to learn from that. Because if I had that one value, I didn't lose that turn. I made it to day 2 of the calling. And it's something where it's like you missed one value that you didn't even realize you missed in an RTN, and the game was 1-1. That was they would have been at 0, and that would have forced them to block more at the time. Like it is game changing how much one value makes up in Flesh and Blood.
Yep.
And asking your opponent where you missed that one value sometimes will improve you next match, because sometimes you draw that exact same hand, or sometimes you get in the exact same scenario and you're like, well, this is what I made last turn, but I realized that was a mistake. And if I do this, and sometimes it's even not like gaining a value, but like gaining a value on a later turn. Like, well, I threw what was the most aggressive hand this turn.
Yeah.
But the opponent set up like truce, like random card, but if I attack them, they gain some life or they draw a card. And it's like, maybe against this matchup, I don't want them to draw a card. So it's actually correct to not attack this turn and just Arsenal pass. And it's something like that. It's like just knowing very niche scenarios that you'll never know if you never ask the question.
Yeah. I think the big thing too, to make sure that you're not just learning for a single spot, is to understand why you made the mistake as well. So if you made a mistake, understand like, okay, I made the mistake because I played too fast, or I made the mistake because I didn't consider all my options, or I made the mistake because I misevaluated the macro game plan, things like that. Like make sure you extrapolate why that mistake was made to then correct it for just in general for the future. For example, I lost a top 8 game at my RTN because I just did not notice there was a ponder token on the board, and that caused me to make the wrong decision. So it wasn't that I blocked when there was a ponder token. It was that I didn't recognize that I didn't assess the game state. I didn't pay enough attention to make this read to then fix it. So now I know how to fix it in the future, is to make sure I'm understanding the game state very clearly. And sorry, I know you have to go, so we'll rush through these last ones. What was it? Don't just chalk up a loss to variance. I see this all the time. People will be like, "Oh, you just high rolled," or "I just high rolled," or "I just low rolled," or so on and so forth, and they just say this game was decided by variance, and that is very, very rarely true. Very rarely true. Sometimes it is true, right? Sometimes someone just high rolls and it's just the game. But it's
triple Blood Rush Bellow on
exactly.
Rhinar, 40 damage. Like,
but sometimes
you can't do anything against that. But
sometimes even those games you could have won. And that's the crazy thing is sometimes even those games, like people will be like, "Oh, I just lost to variance," and it's actually not always true. Like you might have been able to win that game if you played a little bit differently. And so don't just say I like low rolled, they high rolled. Make sure you know where you made a mistake because every game, everybody makes mistakes, and you can always play better every single game.
And
Um,
I honestly think this is like one of also the like at least for my mental health, one of the best ways to like
yes,
go on from game to game. It's like, man, I just got high rolled. Like I'm tilted. I'm angry about like what happened, or maybe I'm upset with what happened, and I'm thinking about the last game. But it's something like when I think of like, and the beautiful thing about Flesh and Blood is it's a skill game. Like
yes,
every single decision makes an impact. Everything you've done could have changed, and that's where it's like I never try and chalk anything to variance. It actually makes me really like frustrated when I can't find the mistake and the opponent can't help me find the mistake because I don't
I don't
think
believe
there's a
it.
lot of
Yeah,
I just don't believe it.
yeah,
There's a mistake I made and I just don't understand it yet. And it's something where I think it's really important not to chalk it up to variance because if you chalk it up to variance, that means you learn nothing from that game. And if
exactly.
you've learned nothing, you can't take that to the next game. You can't take it to the next event. You can't take it to future events. Like it is, I think, super important to be okay. That was unfortunate that it happened this way. I had a different game plan. But after that point, or even before that point, should I have noticed that I didn't see any blood rush bellows coming up and been prepared to block out? Like
Yep.
we were 3/4 of the way through the game when they did that, and they hadn't seen a single one. Maybe I should have expected that,
Yep.
and maybe I
Exactly.
should have planned for that. And it's something where it's like I think that's like it's important to not chalk up the variance and even just try and think about it because it's something like even if you're like I didn't come up with a solution, but the next game, I had an idea of what went wrong. I can think about it then and maybe with my hands come up with a better solution.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing is like I try to after every game, I don't pack up immediately. I just sit there. I'm like, how'd this game play? What could I have done differently? Especially if I lost. I'm like,
Mm.
what did I
Oh
do
yeah.
wrong? Like I try to go through every step. Even if I find one mistake, I try to look for more. I try to find all the mistakes of what I did, how I could have played it differently. Because once I do that, I can figure out how to correct it for next time and win the next game. And make sure you don't get tilted off of these losses, whether it's from whether it is actually a high roll, low roll, or if it's from a mistake. Make sure that you just make sure. Okay, I made a mistake. It's fine. I'm learning, and therefore, if you learn something, you actually won the game. You actually succeeded at your
Mhm.
goal if you learn something, and that's the way to frame it so that you don't get tilted and that you play as best as you can. Um, but yeah. With that, I'm gonna end up with a question for the audience. What is a tip that you have to play well at your RTN that we didn't cover here? Let us know in the comments below, whether on YouTube or in Spotify. And thank you for watching and listening. With that, I'm Cody.
And I'm Jacob.
See you next time.